If you have a true scary story, and more specifically, a glitch in the Matrix, summer story, cryptid encounter, or camping story, consider sending it my way. Just go to astheravendreams.com and click the big button to do so, and as always, thank you. Back in 2016, I was shopping around for my own place. I'd been living with roommates, or with my parents, and I finally had a good paying job and enough savings put aside to get a place for myself. I was long overdue for some privacy. I looked into a few places, but there was one in particular that I was really interested in. It was a small 2-bedroom house with a full basement. It had plenty of room, and I could already lay out how I wanted it to look. The owner seemed like a pretty laid-back guy, and the rent was right around where I was looking for. But when I did a walkthrough, I was surprised to still see someone's belongings in it, as well as a seemingly rushed attempt at cleaning the place. This was my first time looking for a place, though, so I didn't really know what was normal. To show off a place while someone was still living there? However, the owner explained that the previous tenant was in the process of moving out, so it would be empty and cleaned before I moved in. It made sense to me, and as long as I didn't have to deal with it, I had no reason to make a big deal about it. So, I shot for that place and was pretty ecstatic when the owner called me to tell me that all of my information and referrals checked out, so the place was as good as mine. I secured the place, got the keys, and started the moving process. The owner met me there, and we did a move-in walkthrough to check for any damages, or anything of that sort. The house was spotless. Everything was clean, and most importantly, it was empty. Besides a sheet in the corner of the living room. The owner grabbed it and mentioned that it was probably left behind by one of the painters, and he grabbed it and later tossed it in the bin out front. It smelled like paint in there, so it made sense. After we did our walkthrough, the owner left and I began the process of moving. I unpacked a few boxes that I had in my car, and then left to get a small U-Haul. I still had a decent amount of stuff to get from 2 different places. Plus, I wanted to use it to pick up the couch and chair that I had purchased previously. It took me all day as I did this all by myself, but I was able to get everything I had moved in one day. I was going to need to buy some more things for my house, such as more tableware and lamps, but I at least had enough to be comfortable for the time being. All I needed was a place to sleep, my TV, and my cat, Tom. I started unpacking a few boxes, such as Tom's box of food, bed, toys, and litter box, and then my box of bedding and toiletries. I wanted to shower before I went to bed that night, even with how exhausted I was. I got the stuff that I needed, got Tom situated in his bed next to mine, and went to shower. While I was in there, I heard a few thuds that made me stop what I was doing. I had left the bathroom door open because Tom is very clingy, especially in new places, wanting to follow me everywhere, so it's easier to leave the doors open for him. So when I heard scratching sounds and Tom's bell, I assumed he was either running around to play or maybe was getting on top of boxes and knocking them over. It was a simple enough explanation for me that made sense, and I just let it go. I got out of the shower, saw Tom standing by the bathroom door looking into the living room, and I petted him, which diverted his attention back to me. We went back to our room to settle in for the night, and it took me a while to actually fall asleep. Part of me was a bit on edge, but I couldn't really understand why. I eventually convinced myself that it was just because I was sleeping in a new place, and just had some jitters because of that. But after some time, I was finally able to pass out. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I dragged myself out of bed, barely opening my eyes, and opened the bathroom door, noticing the light coming through from under the door. When I opened the door, there was a man standing at the sink and shaving his face. He looked over at me, startled, and I was the same way. However, I started closing the door and apologizing when it finally clicked in my head. There was a stranger in my house. I swung the door back open, now fully awake, and started yelling at him. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" But the man had yelled back to me, accusing me of being in his home. I ran back to the bedroom where Tom remained, and I grabbed my phone to call the police. As I talked to the operator to explain what was happening, the man walked into the room with a pair of scissors held high above his head. I dropped my phone, grabbed my alarm clock, and threw it at the guy. It was enough to throw him off, I guess, and I was able to shove him backwards so I could close the door. I locked it but pushed my back to it so he couldn't try to break through it. Poor Tom looked terrified. I was able to grab my phone with the operator still there and waited for the police to arrive, as the man continued to bang on the door. I then heard knocking on the front door, but there was nothing that I could do. He was still banging on the bedroom door, until finally he seemed to stop to answer the front door. I could hear them talking, or more like the man yelling and the police trying to talk to him. He was yelling at them that I had broken into his house, and he was demanding that they go shoot me. I was terrified. He got to talk to them first, so are they going to believe him? Are they going to shoot or tase me if I open the door? They asked me to come out, and I explained my side of things. I told them what happened and explained that I was the one that called for help. I even showed them copies of the papers I had just signed a few days prior and gave them the owner's phone number. I was still freaking out. They were going to call the owner as well as to confirm, and I was stressing that my first night here, I was already involved with the police. What if he told me never mind and that I had to get out? Thankfully, to my relief, the police came back and told me that not only did the owner confirm that I was the new resident, but that the man was the previous tenant that had been kicked out. The owner actually showed up, and there was a huge discussion between the three of us and the cops. Or more like between them and I listened and just confirmed. Apparently, that guy hadn't paid rent for some time. The owner tried to work things out, but with the amount of complaints from the neighborhood about things he was doing, things they heard or could smell apparently, and the number of police events, he had to evict him. That's also why the police weren't quick to take his side. He was told that he had to leave but refused to do so. So the owner ended up having to pack all of his stuff up to get him out. He apparently wasn't too happy about that, and decided to try to stay anyways. He had collected the key from the last guy, but wasn't aware that he had made a spare and never changed the locks. Thus, how he was able to get in that night while I was in the shower. He was going through my stuff, I learned later, because those were actually my scissors from my office box. In the end, the guy was asked to leave peacefully. He refused and then tried to start a fight, so he got a free ride back to the police station at least. The owner apologized profusely and said that he would actually be back the next day to change all the locks, to make sure that no one else had the keys but us. So, my first night in my new place was pretty eventful. For all the wrong reasons, but it was still mine. I actually still live in the same house with Tom by my side, as the rent is great and the owner is pretty cool. I've also never seen that man again, and I really hope that it stays that way. I have a scary story that takes place not that long ago, when my girlfriend and I were moving into our first nice place. It wasn't our first place, but it was the first place that wasn't a third-floor apartment in a cheap part of town. It was a townhome in what was a pretty decent community. It wasn't like gated or secured or anything, but it was nicer and the rent was more expensive for what it's worth. It was a pretty typical move at first. Stressful, but manageable. My girlfriend and I had been planning it for about 2 months, and while we were tired, we knew what we had to do, and we knew that it had to get done. And we worked our back ends off getting things packed and ready. The morning was pretty much a blur. A last-minute packing up, coordinating with the moving company. We'd hired a well-reviewed local crew to help us move. We could have done it ourselves, but we had the extra money and I like to support the local economy, so why not, right? It was worth it for the peace of mind. By about 11, the truck was fully loaded and we were on to our new place, which was about 45 minutes away, just outside the city. This is where things got a bit sus, as the kids say. First, the truck kept falling behind us on the highway. We would slow down and they would catch up, but then they would disappear again. I tried calling the driver, but the calls kept going to voicemail. My girlfriend told me that it wasn't that big of a deal, that maybe they were having some car issues, or maybe the driver was just paying attention to his cell phone or something. I had a gnawing feeling in my gut, but I just kind of accepted what she said. They had the address and they knew where we were going. So we got to the new place and we waited. And waited. We unloaded what we had fit into the car and then stood outside just waiting for the moving truck. And after about an hour and a half, I was beyond livid. I called the moving company and they said that they would get a hold of the driver when I heard the sound of a moving truck coming down the road. I ended the call and then looked up to see a different truck coming down the road toward our place. It was older, a bit rusted, and it had a different company name painted and faded off on the side. They pulled up in front of our place and 2 guys got out, neither of whom we recognized from earlier. They claimed that they had to take over because of a mechanical issue with the other moving truck. It said that they tried to call us, but the calls weren't going through. There were so many red flags that were going off in my mind, but what could we do? All of our stuff was in that truck. The new driver was insistent on unloading the truck immediately, saying that he had another job he had to get to. I opened the garage door and told them to go ahead and just put the boxes in there and that we would take care of the rest. As they started moving the boxes, I noticed that they weren't anywhere near as careful as the first crew. One of them tossed a box that was marked fragile onto the floor, causing something to crash and possibly break. And when I said something to him, like, "Hey, could you be careful?" he said, "What, you paid for insurance, right?" After a while, I saw one of the boxes that they had dropped into the garage and was a bit confused. I noticed that it said Hernandez on the top. That wasn't our box. I told the guy to stop unloading, that this stuff wasn't ours, and then started walking toward the truck, saying I needed to look at all the stuff in the back, because it seemed like they had stuff that wasn't ours. As soon as I started walking toward the truck, the big guy that was driving pulled out a pocket knife and pointed it right at me, saying, "Back the F off. Just go back inside. This doesn't have to get messy." I threw my hands up like, "Whoa," and asked, "What the hell are you doing?" Thankfully, my girlfriend had seen this happen from inside, and she called 911. It was going to be a few minutes before they got there, but at least she was aware enough to do that. I backed up more into the garage, and the guy started to put his knife away before turning to walk back to the truck. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I was in a bit of a way at that moment. I actually grabbed a shovel that I had sitting against the wall and swung it at the guy. I don't even know why we had a shovel. It had sat in the closet with the broom at our old place, like it was an important tool, and we could use it at this new place, sure. I'm getting off point here. Sorry. I grabbed the shovel, stepped forward, and swung at the guy. He went down and he fell hard. The other guy saw what happened and bolted for the truck. I chased after him with the shovel in my hands. He started the truck and took off down the road, not even bothering to close the back of the truck. Several more boxes marked as Hernandez fell out onto the road, and he disappeared down the street. I stood over the unconscious guy as the cops finally showed up. I had a lot of fun explaining the situation to them, telling them that this guy had pulled a knife on me, which he thankfully still had in his hand when they arrived. He was hurt and unconscious, but not dead. They got him up and had to call an ambulance to check on him, but he was absolutely being arrested. The officers were talking to me about the whole thing while he was being checked out, and they told me that this was likely what was called a moving day scam. They explained what would happen. The movers would help load the truck and work like legit movers, but then they would claim that they were having truck issues and would tell the homeowners to just go and that they would change trucks and catch up. They would use this time to quickly go through the items that they had loaded into the truck, take some valuables, and then reload it as quickly as possible, sending a second truck to make it look more believable. Unfortunately for these scammers, they messed up and either left boxes or put boxes in the trucks that weren't ours. The boxes that were marked Hernandez. When I called him out and went to confront him, the guy panicked and pulled out the knife, which led to where we were at that moment. The officers assumed that the Hernandezes were likely their last victim, and they had just missed some boxes. The officer said that they would try to track down the original truck to see if they could find the other guy as well. But we weren't holding our breaths, though. The odds of them getting anything these guys had swiped, which we obviously hadn't noticed yet, was minimal. We were actually lucky, all things considered. We had most of our stuff. They ended up taking all of our nice plates, and that's about it. The moving company wasn't aware of what was happening, apparently. We spoke with them about the whole thing, and they said that the original truck had actually returned to the building as normal, which was the other part of their scheme. The company wouldn't have known about the whole thing because the trucks were coming back on time. The second truck was privately owned, so they didn't extend the jobs at all. Obviously, their drivers were investigated, and it was found that it was just the two of them that were pulling off the scheme. Well, two of them and the two guys that showed up at our place. It's been about 6 months now, and the moving company did their best to try and make it right, but outside of getting our nice dishes back, dishes that were antique and belonged to my grandmother, there really isn't much they can do. The guys responsible were all arrested, and I would guess that when they get their day in court, they'll get some pretty harsh sentences, depending on what they can prove. Moving is stressful enough without having to worry about con artists stealing your stuff, or having to hit a dude with a shovel. If there's a lesson here, well, I guess it's just be careful who you have help you move. It's hard to really parse a proper lesson from this, since there wasn't much we could have done outside not hiring these guys. It's left me fairly untrusting of movers, that's for sure, and now I keep checking Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist for the dish set, thinking it's going to pop up eventually. And when it does, I'm gonna have some questions for the seller. I wanted to share a story of something that happened to me back as a kid. This was back in the early 2000s. I believe that I was 7 years old at the time. My family was moving from Ohio to Pennsylvania to be closer to my grandmother, whose health had been declining at that point. Apparently, both of my parents were from the state as well, so they were looking forward to moving back. I had 4 older siblings and a baby brother. So while it affected my older siblings more, I was indifferent about it. I remember not really knowing what all moving meant or what it entailed, but I liked packing up all my stuff and the idea of getting a new bedroom. I shared a bedroom with 2 of my older sisters, and where we were going, I would actually get my own room. My parents said the house was much bigger, so maybe that's why I was so willing to go along with it too. We had been packing and cleaning for some time. My parents packed some of our clothing and toiletries in the trunk of my dad's car and the back of my mother's van. So we had stuff to immediately grab when we arrived at our new home. Then on the big moving day, we had 2 big moving trucks over, loading up the boxes and bigger items such as the beds, couches, and chairs. My parents were delegating the moving people as to what needed to go where. My older sister and brother were helping my parents, while the rest of us kids just played in the yard to stay out of the way. They were moving around a lot, and at times they seemed a bit stressed. I tried to ask my mom for a snack, and she mentioned that she would have something in the car for us, and to get in with my sister. I went back outside and told my sisters that we needed to get into the car, so they made their way over to our mom's van. They continued to play together as they got in their spots. After they were in, I went to grab my carry-along toys from the yard. As I grabbed them, I watched one of the moving guys carry my mattress and bed frame into the truck. Being a kid, I was excited seeing my bed because I loved it, and I got this crazy idea of checking it out while I was in the truck. I had been in the bed of my uncle's truck before, and I thought it was fun, so I thought being in the back of the moving truck with my bed would be a blast. I walked to the back of the truck and saw my bed sticking out of the back, behind some boxes. I walked to the back and found my bed being used to hold up the mattress behind it. It was a small canopy bed, so I guess it was easier to use it as a stand instead of taking it apart. I also remember my parents struggling to put it together, so maybe they didn't want to have to take it apart either. None of that entered my mind at the time other than seeing my bed sitting there, so I jumped on it immediately. I had just been sitting on it when I heard someone walking up the truck ramp. I didn't want to be told to leave yet, so I laid on my bed thinking that I would be hidden. They tossed a few more things in the truck, and when I heard them walk away, I looked over and saw that they brought in the old recliner, a bookshelf, and a few boxes. This pattern repeated once more, but this time, after they tossed a few more items in, I watched the truck grow dark as they closed the door. I stood up to look around to confirm what had happened. Shortly after, I heard my parents saying something I couldn't make out, and my baby brother crying. Then I heard the truck starting. At first, I got excited. I was going to get to ride in the back of the truck after all. I ran back to sit on my bed, ready for the ride, but immediately the truck lurched forward as it went over the steep curb in our driveway, and the boxes on the side toppled over onto me. I was a very small child, so those boxes were very heavy. I really couldn't move. I'd been pinned under them, and that's when I became scared. I watched the 2 stacks of boxes by my head sway as the driver hit every bump, fearing they were going to fall on my head and crush me. I didn't know what was in them or how heavy they were. I just laid there scared with tears in my eyes as my ankles started hurting. I laid there for what felt like hours as they drove with nothing I could do about it. I had already cried some, and after playing for several hours and now this excitement, I grew tired, so I eventually fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep, but when I woke up, I felt the truck come to a stop. I could still hear other cars driving around us, and I could smell gas. I assumed we had stopped to refuel. I laid there hoping that they would open the back for some reason to check on me, but no one ever did. I became upset all over again when, after some time, the truck started up. So I was left to lay there some more. We seemed to drive for some time. I was hot and thirsty as this was July, but with nothing else to do, I fell asleep again. The next time I woke up, it was just as dark, but this time the truck was off and still. For how long, though, I had no idea. I tried to move the boxes, but I think with the heat and the exhaustion, I was even weaker than normal and could not budge them. The grooves in the truck floor were digging into my leg and making it even more difficult. I laid there as time passed again, singing and counting as high as I could, just trying to entertain myself, until I finally heard shuffling and the truck door flew open. I tried to pull myself up some to see who it was, but I couldn't see over the boxes in front of me. But I didn't need to see who it was to figure it out. I heard my dad's familiar voice say, "Oh, damn it," most likely seeing the mess of boxes in the truck. As he approached where I was, I raised my arm and with a scratchy voice I called out to him. I'll never forget the look of shock and relief on his face, not to mention the yelp he let out when he realized I was in there. He immediately started moving the boxes and pulled me out, scraping the back of my leg across the truck. I was happy to see him, definitely relieved to be out, but my dad was frantic. He was hugging me, apologizing, asking if I was okay. Then he said that they had been looking for me and asked, "Didn't you hear us calling for you?" But I didn't. I didn't hear my name once. He shouted out into what I saw was an unfamiliar house, saying that he had found me. My mom quickly came running to the garage, followed by two of my siblings, and my mom began hugging me as they both talked about where I was and what happened. They brought me inside the house, where I learned that this was in fact our new home. I had traveled the whole 4-hour drive in the back of that truck. They explained things to me later that day, as I also told them what had happened. As I got older, I could understand the severity of that situation too. When it was finally time for us to go, the moving guys closed and locked up the trucks, and they drove them as my parents drove their cars. My mom had told me to get in the car as both my parents packed us in. They assumed that I was with the other. My dad knew that there was more space in the van, so he assumed I was in there, while my mom assumed that I went with my dad because I'm so-called a daddy's girl. They apparently didn't think to do a head count. At some point, the driver of the truck I was in stopped for gas, and even went inside to get something to eat. He was alone. My parents continued on their drive, wanting to get there soon, not as worried about the trucks. There was an understanding that they may have to stop for gas or food, and maybe even a hotel for a night. There was a possibility that the driver could have stopped at a hotel, and I could have been locked in there overnight. Thankfully, the man just needed to pick me up and carried on. Once they arrived, they discussed unloading that night or waiting until the next day, even though it would cost my parents another day. They decided to wait, as everyone was tired and my baby brother was cranky. They all went inside, and when they were deciding on dinner, that's when I noticed that I wasn't with them. They looked all over the house, thinking maybe I was exploring, but they couldn't find me. They looked in the yard, in the two vehicles again, and still nothing. And that's when they started to panic. The movers had already left to go to a hotel, and they called them to see if they had seen me, and they said they hadn't. They even called one of our neighbors from our old place in Ohio, fearing that they could have possibly left me behind. But of course, the neighbor couldn't find me either. My parents had gone outside and started shouting my name and even called the police, all while I was asleep in the back of this truck. As they waited for the police to arrive, my dad went out to the truck, as the one I was in had bedding and some kitchen boxes in it, searching for blankets and cups. And that's when he found me. I learned that they had been at the house, sorting out their next steps, dinner and sleeping arrangements, and searching for me, all within about 3 hours. I had been in that hot, dark truck for nearly 7 hours. The police did show up, but they told them that they did find me, hiding in the truck, so nothing further ever happened with them, other than being greeted by the weird new family in town, I guess. So, that's the story of my thrilling and pretty scary ride to our new place, and my first moving experience. I know that this was a long time ago, but my parents definitely learned their lesson that day. They constantly did head counts and checked on us, especially as my little brother started walking. I also learned my lesson, and I don't like to go into places that can lock me in alone. I was lucky that it wasn't a longer period of time, or hotter, and that there was still some airflow, because the outcome of this could have been a lot worse. Hello, Raven. I've been a subscriber since 2021, and I want to thank you for everything you do. Oh, well, thank you. Moving day was one of the most stressful days I've ever experienced because of a single encounter. My family and I were moving to one of the neighboring suburbs into a larger house, since the needs of the family has changed. My grandparents moved in with us, and there are 5 kids in the family, not including myself. Needless to say, we have a lot of stuff. There was a U-Haul out the front that would need to make multiple trips back and forth to deliver all the furniture and boxes. Since I'm one of the older siblings, and my parents trust me to be alone to get things done, I stayed behind to clean and get things ready to hand the keys back to Jeff, our landlord, who was also a family friend, who helped the family out during a rough time. Basically, we were homeless, and he gave us a place to stay. Jeff is pretty cool as far as landlords go. If we had any issues, he would have the issues fixed quickly, and nor did he randomly raise the prices, etc. I was standing chatting to him in the empty house when we heard footsteps. We looked at each other, strangely, because we didn't expect to see anyone else. We left some larger pieces of furniture that we didn't want to keep anymore, along with a couple of boxes of secondhand clothes for the kids to use, and some other random pieces too. Everything was still in good condition, but we just didn't want or need it anymore. Jeff called out, and we heard scurrying away. The pair of us walked to see what was going on. One of the boxes was open, the one that had old baby and children's clothing inside of it. Some pieces of clothing were hanging over the side. We called out, "Hello," to see if anyone was there, going from room to room to see if somehow somebody was in the house. In the empty side room, hiding in a small corner, out of sight if you happened to open the door, was a man whom neither of us recognized. He had a scrappy, unkempt beard, dirty clothing, and a pretty strong stench. He was holding pieces of clothing and rubbing his greasy face on them and twitching. I don't know what he was doing with the clothing. I really didn't want to know. We pulled him out of the house, as other than trespassing and some minor theft and being gross, he hadn't done anything that bad, at least according to Jeff. However, the man still came back to the property. I was cleaning to ensure that we got our full deposit back. I was listening to music with my earpods in, vibing and enjoying myself. Jeff hadn't asked us to do a deep clean before we went, but it was pretty much a favor and I was happy to do it. I don't mind cleaning, and any excuse to get time to myself is treasured. I was dusting and cleaning the inside windows, and I nearly didn't see him. I jumped when I realized what I saw. It was him just squatting outside the window, staring inside. This time Jeff wasn't here with me. I told the guy to leave or that I would call the police. He stood there leering at me with a gross grin on his face. And that was when I noticed what he was doing with his hand, which was definitely inside of his pants. I'm trying to say this in the most polite way possible, and in a way that won't get you in trouble with YouTube. Let's just say his hand was wrestling with the one-eyed trouser snake. I remember the gross look on his face. He knew that he was freaking me out, and he had said something to me, but I didn't understand it, and I didn't come back to ask him to explain himself. I ran to another room, locked the door, and called the police. They didn't find him, but they told Jeff about what happened, He told me that he was going to install some security cameras since some of his family was moving into the house. I kept cleaning, but I was never there alone after that. During this time, I never saw him again. I took one final look at the old house, got in the car, and half expected to see him through the window or something equally out of a horror movie, but I didn't see anything. When I was settling in and unpacking in the new house, and I told the family about what had happened, the local grapevine warned people about the man and his creepy tendencies. He had apparently taken children's clothing off of clotheslines, and was found with it by the police. So far, he hadn't tried to touch any children or do anything weird with them, thank God. I wasn't physically hurt by this experience, but I was definitely creeped out. So that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying moving day stories. Stories where... Ooh, my voice just cracked. Stories where moving day is a terrifying day indeed. I've never really had moving day horror stories. The closest thing to a scary story I've ever had for moving day would be back whenever Patience and I moved in here. Wasn't necessarily scary. It was more so like a roar moment. We went to rent a U-Haul, and they didn't have any small trucks, so we had to take the really big one. And I don't know how to drive those, so I was like, I am going to wreck this damn thing. Oh no. I didn't, though. I didn't wreck it. I got it here to the new place. I even got it backed into the driveway so we could get all of our stuff out of it. Yeah, that's right. Your boy is skilled, apparently. And horrified, because I didn't want to drive that thing. I never want to drive a thing like that again, so... Anyways, yeah. Good scary stories. Moving days is just scary in general. I think one person said that. That moving is stressful without having to deal with, you know, the BS that happens in these stories, so... Yeah, definitely agree. We've lived here since, about 7 years now, I think. And I don't plan to move anytime soon. We're probably going to spend well over a decade here, probably around 15 years, maybe. I know we rent, and maybe someday it'd be nice to own a house if we ever had the money and the decision to do so. But honestly, I kind of just like renting here. I like where I live. It's comfortable. It's fun. Our neighbor's pretty cool. So, yeah. The only thing I don't like is mowing the grass outside, like I've mentioned before. So, out back, the steep hill where it's really thick grass and chokes out the mower all the time. Anyways, hopefully y'all enjoyed these stories. I'm just babbling. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, the like button, if you will. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. That would be tremendous of you. And if you're feeling ever so bold, you can go down below the video and leave me a comment with your thoughts. How you're doing, how your week's going, what you have planned for this weekend, if anything. You can also send in your scary stories if you have them. astheravendreams.com. It's a pretty simple process. You click the button, takes you to another page, you submit your stories. Done. Yeah. This is the third... I know you guys won't get this in the same day as the other ones, but this is the third video I have recorded and put together today. Today's the 9th. I'm recording this on the 9th. So, 3 videos put together in one day is a record for me. It's pretty good. I think it's a record. It might not be a record. I think it is, though. If it was 4, it would definitely be a record, but I don't think I have a 4th one in me. My point is, I'm getting ahead this month. I'm pushing myself to the limit. We're going to have a great month for the rest of the month, so... Anyways, friends, I hope you remember you are loved, that you are valid, that you are important, that you're the best you that you can be. Please just never forget it, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and sleep well.